My fiancé sent an HR email to fire me and cancel our wedding. 48 hours later, his company collapsed. At 5:14 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with an automated notification. It wasn't a text from my fiancé of 4 years. It was an official email from Human Resources at Apex Logic, the artificial intelligence startup we had built together from my garage in San Jose. The subject line was 6 words long: Notice of Employment Termination and Separation. I opened it, expecting a glitch in our corporate software. Instead, I read a cold, boilerplate legal letter informing me that my role as Chief Technology Officer and Lead Systems Architect was terminated effective immediately. My access to company servers, internal communications, and physical facilities had been revoked. Attached at the bottom was a second document, a formal letter from Julian Vance, my fiancé and CEO, stating that our personal engagement was officially dissolved and that any attempt to contact him directly would be treated as workplace harassment. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. He used a scheduled HR automated dispatch to fire me from my own life. I sat down at my kitchen table, the silence in the room pressing against my chest like a lead weight. For a few terrifying minutes, the air felt thin. For years of 90-hour workweeks, missed holidays, and burned-out eyes flashed through my mind. I remembered sleeping on a cot beside my server racks in 2023 when our prototype crashed 3 hours before our seed investor pitch. I remembered my mother, a retired public school teacher, handing me a cashier's check for $40,000 from her pension savings when we couldn't make payroll in our second year. Julian had cried on our couch that night, holding my hands, swearing on his life that my mother would be repaid tenfold once we made it. Over the past 6 months, though, as our platform Neural Mesh gained industry recognition and our Series B funding round approached, Julian began to change. The man who used to wear faded flannel shirts and thank me for solving multivariable algorithmic bottlenecks started wearing $3,000 tailored suits. He brought in polished executives from traditional Ivy League corporate backgrounds, men like Chad Kensington, a frat brother from his college days who knew nothing about neural networks, but excelled at talking over women in executive meetings. Julian slowly began pushing me out of investor dinners. He'd tell me my time was too valuable to waste on glad-handing, that I needed to stay in the lab while he handled the vision. Then came the subtle criticisms. My hair was too plain, my clothes were too functional. My Honda Civic didn't project the right image for the executive team of a future unicorn. A month ago, he introduced Chloe Sterling to our advisory network. She was a 26-year-old socialite whose father sat on the board of several major West Coast private equity funds. Julian started coming home late, smelling of expensive cologne and vintage wine, claiming he was building strategic alliances. I stared at the termination letter on my laptop screen. The timing wasn't an accident. In exactly 72 hours, Vanguard Capital, one of the premier venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, was scheduled to wire $18 million in Series B funding to Apex Logic. The deal valued our company at $75 million. By terminating my employment 3 days before the closing, Julian was attempting to activate a bad actor termination clause in our preliminary equity agreement, effectively stripping me of my 25% co-founder stake and reclaiming my shares for his personal pool. He thought he was executing a flawless corporate coup. He expected me to collapse, cry, and call a marriage counselor. He assumed that because I was an engineer who preferred logic to office politics, I was defenseless. What Julian had forgotten in his rush to become a tech celebrity was the fundamental rule of software engineering. Details are everything. I walked over to my home office closet, reached into the bottom drawer of my fireproof safe, and pulled out the original blue accordion folder from the week we incorporated Apex Logic 4 years ago. Back then, Julian had been obsessed with glossy marketing materials and press releases. He had hired a cheap online legal service to generate our incorporation documents. I remembered the afternoon vividly. He had handed me a stack of papers to sign, including the standard proprietary information and inventions agreement, the document that legally transfers all source code, software patents, and intellectual property from the developer to the corporation. My late father, who had spent 30 years as a contract attorney in Ohio, had given me one piece of advice when I moved to California. Never sign away what you build until the ink on your equity acceleration clause is completely dry. I had reviewed the paperwork 4 years ago and noticed Julian had left out my guaranteed non-dilution protection. I had placed the unsigned IP assignment agreement in my folder, telling Julian I would sign it as soon as he updated the writer. He promised he would, but then our prototype took off, investors started calling, and the administrative detail was completely buried. I turned the physical pages in my hands. The proprietary information and inventions agreement for neural mesh was sitting right there in front of me. Blink. And signed. I owned every single line of the core codebase. Not Apex Logic. Not Julian Vance. Me. Without neural mesh. Apex Logic was nothing more than an empty corporate shell with expensive office furniture and a CEO who couldn't code his way out of an open door. I didn't scream. I didn't smash my laptop. I poured a glass of ice water, picked up my phone, and called my father's old law partner, Uncle Thomas, a ferocious, silver-haired intellectual property litigator who had spent 40 years defending independent inventors from corporate predators. It took Thomas less than 20 minutes to review the digital files I sent him. When he called me back, his voice was as smooth as polished granite. Maya, my dear, he said, they didn't just build a house on sand. They built a skyscraper on land they don't even lease. You hold the master key to the entire kingdom. What do we do? I asked. We don't negotiate, Thomas replied. We enforce. The next afternoon, less than 24 hours after my termination, a black sedan pulled up to my driveway. I watched from my living room window as Evelyn Vance, Julian's mother, stepped out. Evelyn was a woman who treated social status like a competitive sport. She had always viewed me as an inconvenient placeholder, a middle-class girl from the Midwest who was useful while Julian was struggling, but entirely unsuitable for the high society life she envisioned for her son. She didn't even bother to knock gently. She rang the doorbell twice, sharp and impatient. When I opened the door, she walked past me into my entryway without waiting for an invitation, adjusting her silk scarf. Maya, she began, her tone carrying the practiced condescension of a country club president. I came here to make sure you behave like a sensible adult about this unfortunate situation. Good afternoon, Evelyn, I said calmly, leaning against the doorway with my hands folded. Julian is under an immense amount of pressure, she said, pulling a thin designer envelope from her leather handbag. This company is his legacy. You've had a nice run, and you've been compensated with a generous salary over the years. But he is moving into a different circle now. Chloe's family is providing doors that you simply cannot open. She placed the envelope on my entryway console table. Inside is a severance agreement. Julian has graciously offered you $50,000 in cash, provided you sign a complete non-disclosure agreement and agree not to speak to anyone in the tech community or the press. If you try to fight this, his legal team will tie you up in court until you are completely bankrupt. You know he has the backing of serious investors now. I looked at the envelope, then looked back at Evelyn's pristine, arrogant face. Did Julian send you here, or did you volunteer to do his dirty work? Julian is busy finalizing an $18 million deal with Vanguard Capital, she said, her chin tilting upward. He doesn't have time for emotional drama. Take the money, Maya. Buy yourself a nice car, move back to Ohio, and leave the big business to people who belong in it. Thank you for your visit, Evelyn, I said quietly. Please leave. Her eyes narrowed. You're making a catastrophic mistake. You have no leverage here. We'll see, I replied, opening the front door wider. She huffed, spun on her heel, and walked down the pathway to her sedan, confident that she had intimidated the humble engineer. What she didn't know was that while she was driving to my house, Thomas had already dispatched a formal cease and desist order and an intellectual property injunction notice directly to the personal email and legal counsel of Arthur Thorne, the managing partner at Vanguard Capital who was leading the Series B investment. By 8 a.m. the following morning, just 24 hours before the $18 million wire was scheduled to be executed, my phone rang. It was an emergency Zoom invitation sent by Vanguard Capital's legal compliance team. I logged into the meeting from my home office, wearing a professional navy blazer. My attorney, Thomas, sat beside me in his litigator's suit. On the screen were 6 boxes. In the center box was Julian, sitting in our high-end conference room at Apex Logic headquarters in Palo Alto. He was wearing a fresh suit, flanked by Chad Kensington and a high-priced corporate defense attorney named Marcus Sterling. Sitting in another box was Arthur Thorne, the gray-haired, stern-faced senior partner at Vanguard Capital. Julian's face flushed red the moment he saw me on the screen. Arthur, what is this? Julian demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. Maya Lin is a former employee who was terminated for performance issues and breach of internal protocols. She has no standing to be in a preliminary closing review. This is an outrageous distraction. Arthur Thorne raised a single hand, silencing Julian instantly. Quiet, Julian, Thorne said coldly. We received a legal filing 4 hours ago that, if true, turns our entire valuation of your company into smoke. I want answers, and I want them right now. Arthur turned his gaze to my box on the screen. Mr. Vance's attorney claims that Ms. Lin was an at-will employee who surrendered all software rights under standard founder agreements upon her termination. Ms. Lin, your attorney claims that Apex Logic doesn't own its core product. Care to explain? Julian sneered into his camera. She's lying, Arthur. She's a bitter ex-fiancé trying to extort us because I ended our personal relationship. She signed the exact same incorporation paperwork everyone else signed. Thomas leaned forward into the camera microphone, his voice calm, measured, and terrifyingly precise. Mr. Thorne, if Mr. Vance believes my client signed a proprietary information and inventions agreement, I invite his counsel to present a signed, executed copy to this board right now. Silence fell over the digital room. Julian turned to Marcus Sterling, his corporate lawyer. Marcus, pull the incorporation binder from the server. Show them the signed PI. Sterling was frantically typing on his keyboard, clicking through digital files. Seconds dragged into a minute. The color slowly drained from Sterling's face. He leaned over and whispered something into Julian's ear. Julian's jaw went slack. What do you mean it's missing? He blurted out, forgetting his microphone was unmuted. It has to be in the vault. She was the CTO. It isn't missing, Julian, I said, speaking directly into my camera with an even, undisturbed tone. It was never signed. I flagged the missing equity rider 4 years ago. You were so busy throwing launch parties and ordering custom signs for the office that you told me we'd fix the paperwork later. Later never came. I held up a pristine, physical document to my camera lens, showing the blank signature line on page 8. The federal copyright for the foundational code architecture of neural mesh, filed under registration number TX 8-912, belongs solely to me as an independent developer, I continued. Apex Logic has been using my intellectual property under an implied, revocable personal license. As of 5:14 p.m. on Tuesday, the exact moment Julian dispatched my termination email, that license was revoked. Arthur Thorne's face turned from stern to thunderous. He stared through the screen at Julian. Julian, are you telling me that Vanguard Capital was 72 hours away from wiring $18 million into a company that doesn't legally own its primary asset? Arthur, please. Julian stammered, his polished executive demeanor evaporating into pure panic. This is a technical oversight. We can resolve this right now. Maya, name your price. We'll give you a cash payout. We'll give you $2 million right now out of the round proceeds. $2 million. Thomas interrupted with a dry chuckle. Mr. Vance, my client isn't looking for a settlement from you. She is enforcing her statutory rights under Title 17 of the United States Code. As of midnight tonight, any deployment, server execution, or commercial utilization of the neural mesh codebase by Apex Logic will constitute intentional federal copyright infringement. Thomas looked directly at Arthur Thorne. And as Vanguard Capital has been formally notified of this title defect, any capital transfer made to Apex Logic will render your firm a joint tortfeasor in willful infringement, subject to statutory damages and an immediate federal injunction freeze on all corporate assets. Arthur Thorne didn't hesitate for a single second. He closed the thick leather folder on his desk. The Series B term sheet is officially withdrawn, Thorne announced, his voice dropping like a gavel. Vanguard Capital's offer is void. Furthermore, Vanguard will be initiating an immediate forensic accounting review of the $2 million in seed capital we previously provided to Apex Logic to ensure no funds were misappropriated. Arthur, wait. No, please. Julian shouted, leaning so close to his camera that his face was distorted. She's doing this out of spite. She's destroying everything. You destroyed yourself, Julian, Arthur Thorne said coldly. You brought us a house without a foundation, and you lied about who built it. Thorne disconnected from the call. Within 48 hours, the dominoes fell with breathtaking speed. Without the $18 million cash injection from Vanguard Capital, Apex Logic was completely insolvent. News of the missing IP rights leaked through Silicon Valley's tight-knit investment network. Within 3 days, every major venture fund on the West Coast blacklisted Julian Vance. Vendor after vendor filed suit against the company. The luxury office lease in Palo Alto was canceled, and the custom $18,000 conference table Julian had ordered on corporate credit was repossessed. When Vanguard's forensic audit revealed that Julian had spent over $200,000 of early investor funds on personal luxury vehicle leases, private jet charters for romantic trips to Cabo with Chloe Sterling, and high-end apparel, the board of directors removed him as CEO and launched a lawsuit against him for breach of fiduciary duty. Chloe Sterling left him less than a week later, her father making sure her name was completely disassociated from Julian's collapsing public mess. 2 weeks after the Zoom call, I sat in the modest office of a reputable, founder-friendly venture firm in San Francisco. Sitting across from me was Arthur Thorne. He had resigned from Vanguard to launch an independent fund focused on deep tech engineering led by actual builders. Maya, Arthur said, sliding a crisp term sheet across the wooden desk toward me. $12 million in series of funding for a new entity. You own 60% of the equity, with full anti-dilution protection and total control of the board. You bring the neural mesh IP to the new company, you hire your own engineering team, and you build this platform the way it was meant to be built. I read through the pages carefully, line by line, verifying every clause. There's one condition, I said, looking up at him. Arthur smiled slightly. Name it. The first check written out of this capital pool goes to repay my mother's original $40,000 investment, plus 8% compounding interest for 4 years. Done, Arthur said without a moment's hesitation. That's not even a condition, Maya. That's just good business. I signed my name on the final line with my father's old fountain pen, feeling a deep, steady wave of peace settle into my bones. 3 months later, I drove through Palo Alto in my reliable Honda Civic on my way to my new company headquarters. At a red light near the train station, I happened to glance over at the sidewalk. A man in a wrinkled, off-the-rack suit was carrying a cardboard box full of personal binders toward the station platform. His hair was messy, his shoulders were slumped, and he looked 10 years older than he had in the spring. It was Julian. He had been forced to sell his luxury apartment, his sports car was gone, and his family was facing mountain-high legal bills to defend him against investor fraud claims. He caught a glimpse of my car at the light. For a brief second, our eyes met through the glass. There was no anger left in me, no hatred, no regret. Just the cool, clear clarity of an engineer who had diagnosed a critical flaw in her life, eliminated the defect, and rebuilt the system stronger than before. The light turned green. I stepped on the gas and drove forward into my future, leaving him behind in the rearview mirror where he belonged.